Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depends on when you're watching this. Welcome to Scotch 101. My name is Jason Sagness. I'm with Vinocopia Wine and Spirits. We're a distributor located down in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And what we're going to do today is run through kind of Scotch basics as a way to do seminars that I would normally do in person. So while I can't see your delightful faces, that really is a lot of fun. At least I can still give you some information regarding Scotch and Scotch whiskey. So today, let's start at the very beginning. What is whiskey? Whiskey, by definition, is any distillate that's going to be made from cereal grain. What do I mean by cereal grain? We're talking corn, barley, wheat, rye. Those are going to be your primaries. In this case, Scotch is just made from a cereal grain from a very specific area. Scotch is whiskey that's made in Scotland. It's made from barley, water, and then obviously some yeast to make sure that you get some alcohol going. But we'll get into that a little bit more later. It needs to be distilled, or is traditionally distilled, a minimum of 2 times. And then from there, they put that into barrels, bottling it at a minimum of 40% alcohol by volume, or ABV. So how do they do it? What they do is they take the barley and they allow it to germinate. They get it wet and it starts to sprout. They then stop that by adding heat, a heat source, and we'll get into a couple different ways they can do that in a little bit. But they take that germinated grain, that's your malted barley. They mash it down with a turn, and then add water, and then add yeast. It's that yeast that starts changing the starches or the sugars inside the grain to alcohol, and that makes something called a wort. That wort is what they add to the still. In Scotland, it is a copper pot still, usually. In the copper pot still, what that does is that condenses the alcohol that has been converted. As it heats, alcohol evaporates at a faster rate, at a lower temperature than water does. So what comes off, first are going to be some things that you don't really want. They're called the heads, and it's methanol and some other things that is just not going to make things taste really good. Once those come off, they make a cut, and the next part that comes off is going to be the hearts of the distillate. That's what you want. That's what you're going to get in the bottle. They do that twice, and what comes off around 70 or so percent ABV. That said, they can go as high as 98.4. Most people don't do that. Once that's off, then you have your finished distillate. That then goes into a barrel, and there's different kinds of barrels that they can use, but it must be an oak barrel. There it ages in Scotland, again, for 3 years minimum before it becomes bottled and becomes scotches. So the first one that we'll start with today is Highland Queen. And Highland Queen is going to be our representation of a blended scotch. What is a blended scotch? Well, we've got 2 main types that we're going to be showing today, blended and single malt. When it says blend, what they're referring to is that it's a distillate that's coming from multiple distilleries and then being blended together. So when it says single, it's referring not to what's going into it, but where it's coming from. So a blend, multiple areas, single, one single area. Doesn't matter if it's saying single malt, single grain, that's what they're talking about. So with Highland Queen is named after Mary Queen of Scots, the Highland Queen. This is a very special blend in that they take those blends or those single malts from multiple areas, put them together, and then age them together in a sherry cask. What that does is that gives it a little bit of sweetness and a little bit of extra flavor. You can tell that it's got that nice dark color, and that's coming from that sherry scotch, that sherry barrel. On the nose, definitely some sweetness to it, almost like candied fruits. Soft, rich, perfect little Monday through Friday type of whiskey. Next, now we get into single malt. Single malt makes up only 10% of what gets produced in Scotland. The other 90 go into different blends. In this case, we're going to start with Tullibardine. Tullibardine is located in the Highlands. So if you looked at a map of Scotland, this is my makeshift map, maybe seeing a better one than this. But above the Gorbals is the Highland area. Below that would be considered the lowlands. We'll get to the other areas in just a moment. Above the Gorbals, right by Edinburgh and Glasgow, if you drew a triangle straight up, that's where you would find the Tullibardine distillery. It's on the east coast of Scotland, but kind of in the center, east central Scotland. Because of where it's at, it doesn't get any of the external influences from the ocean. So it's a very neutral area where things age. Think Kentucky. Kentucky, when it comes to bourbon, is right in the center of the country, so you're not going to get a lot of other influences to the whiskey itself, to the finished product. So you can tell by the color, it's got that nice golden color to it. Again, they don't add anything to this other than water. Now, they can by law add caramel color to it, give it a false sense of darkness and richness to it. In this case, for everything we're showing today, they don't. Why? Because they believe that the whiskeys are going to stand on their own. Now in comparison, the single malt from Tullibardine, this is the Sovereign, only sees time in ex-bourbon barrels. That's why you're not getting those ready color notes that you would see from Highland Queen. It's also named Sovereign. Again, it means that there isn't going to be anything for sure less than 3 years of age. Kind of nice bready notes, kind of bright ripe fruits, a little bit of floral as well. Little kind of notes of honey as well. Now, the other thing I'm going to do is I've got a bottle of water. When it comes to single malts, I recommend trying it with a little bit of water. Some purists are going to scream, shout. If you're doing that at home, that's fine. But what happens with Scotch is when you add a little bit of water to it, and it was just a dash, you can start seeing the oils break up inside the glass. And that's opening up the Scotch. So now I'm getting even hints of orange peel, even maybe a little bit of heather. And that's coming through on the palate as well. So it's changing the Scotch. So as we're tasting through, I would encourage you to try a little bit of water, try it neat by itself, let it roll around a little bit, and then try it with a little bit of water to see how that changes it. You may like one better than you like the other way. The other nice thing, you get more Scotch. The other one we're going to do from the Highlands today is going to be Edredor 10 year. Edredor has the distinction of being the smallest single malt distillery in Scotland. They produce roughly 12 casks a week. That's virtually nothing. Why we're doing this in contrast, this is from Perthshire. So it's a little bit more central in Scotland. So again, we're still getting very neutral, no external influences from it. However, you can tell by the color that again, now we're looking at some sherry influence on this. Again, the two different influences. Now what they do, somewhat differently than Tullibard, is they do use peat to stop the malting process when it comes to their barley. So what is peat? Peat is a moss. It's an inorganic, or it's a decomposed organic material. It's gray, it's kind of gross, generally comes out of bogs in great big bricks. But what they do is they light it and it smolders. It's that heat that stops the germination process of that barley. And in the process, gives it a little whiff of smoke. So I'm getting a little bit of that on the nose. But definitely that sherry, that sweetness is coming through. Candied fruits, which is really unique and different in a 10-year-old. When I add the water, some of that smoke influence goes away. It's still there, but it's just kind of in the background. Just a beautiful, beautiful little dram. And that's Edredor. That's the Highlands. Next we're going to go to an island. Now when we think about the islands in Scotland, generally speaking, we're talking about islands that go up the western coast. There are the Isle of Mull, the Isle of Skye. There's quite a few. So when you talk about the islands, that's almost always where you're talking. However, I've got a different one. This is the Isle of Arran. And the Isle of Arran is nestled right down here, again on a makeshift map of my hand, between the lowlands and the outjut of Campbelltown, two additional areas of Scotch producing. There's an island called Arran. Arran used to have quite a few different distilleries. It's down to one. And other than that, there's basically marshes and a golf course. So if you want to drink Scotch, go see a marsh and go golfing. That's a really good place to go. But it's the only distillery on the Isle of Arran and carries its names. They make several different kinds. Today, we're going to do the 14-year. Now, just like the Edredor, the Arran 14-year has an age statement. What does that mean? The 10-year and the 14-year, that represents the youngest distillate that must be in there to be aged properly. In other words, nothing younger than 10 years in Edredor, nothing younger than 14 years in Arran. Why does that matter? Different ages are going to give you different characteristics. Now, with this one coming from an island is going to be surrounded by water. And as Scotch ages, it breathes, it evaporates. As it evaporates to the angel's share, something has to replace it inside the cask. That's going to be the surrounding air. So that surrounding air is going to influence what the finished product is going to be. So again, as we were talking in the Highlands, where those were inland and pretty neutral, not really getting a lot of influence from external sources, this is going to get more influenced by that ocean. So when you think ocean, you're going to think that briny sea air. So there's going to be a little bit of salinity inside this Scotch as well. You can tell by the color, you're getting some of those darker hues. Again, no caramel color added in this. So when you're getting some of those darker hues, that's going to represent that in this case, it does see some time in sherry cask. What they do with the 14 is for 12 years, it ages in Scotland in ex-bourbon barrels. For the final 2 years, they actually put them in brand new ex-bourbon barrels and ex-sherry barrels, and then blend those together to come up with this particular dram. Definitely getting a little bit of that sea saltiness, but it's really balanced with a lot of the sherry influence with some of that sweetness. So some of those candied fruit are coming through. Definitely a lot of citrus. Even get a little bit of tropical in there. But definitely with that line of the sea influence as well. Yeah, I took 2 sips before adding the water. Opening up really nicely. Definitely more kind of, some of the sweetness recedes when I'm adding some of the water, and it's coming across almost a little bit closer to the Tullamore. But just a really nice dram. Now, from a pricing standpoint, aged and age statement scotches are basically always going to be a little bit more expensive. Sometimes a lot more expensive. Reason being isn't a measure of quality. Really, when it comes right down to it, it's a matter of taxes. We all love our taxes, including the Scottish government. So, when we're talking 14 years, as soon as that distillate hits that barrel, they start paying taxes on it. So that means they can't make any money on a 14-year for 14 years. And yet they still have to pay taxes on every barrel that's in there. So they've got to recoup that somehow, and that unfortunately gets passed along to you and me. That said, aged scotches, depending on what your palate is, what your flavor profile is, makes all the difference. If you like some of the honey notes, the citrus notes, the younger flavors, edge towards a younger scotch. If you like some more of those candied fruits, some of those sweeter styles, definitely go on the older side. There's nothing right or wrong about either. It's all about what you like. Because at the end of the day, you're the one that's going to be drinking. So we're going to finish on Arran with the Machrie Moor. Machrie Moor is the moor, the bog, that's on the Isle of Arran. And what they do differently in this one is that they peat the barley. So now you're going to get a lot of those smoky aspects to it. This is essentially the peated version of their Scotch. Generally, it's going to be somewhere between 6 and 8 years, depending on the release. And now you're going to get some of those medicinal notes. We kind of use peat as shorthand. When we talk about a Scotch being peaty, it doesn't really tell you anything. Peating is a matter of process, not necessarily of flavor. You probably don't want to sit down and have a slice of peat, or at least I don't. So when we use peat, we're talking shorthand for being smoky, maybe even some medicinal, some iodine. Some of you just heard that and went, ew. Yes, I see. It's something that you grow into. It's something that your palate can either really love or really hate. There's nothing wrong, right or wrong about it. I grew into it my own self, but definitely the nose on this is going to give that peat, that medicinal iodine aspect. But it's still light, definitely viscous. Again, underneath that, you're still getting some of that salinity that you would expect from something from an island. And now for some water. See how that changes it. Again, some of the smoke, some of the iodine, it's kind of dissipated a little bit. Still there. But definitely on the body, a lot more of the fruit and honey are coming through. I want to change that quite a bit. So that is the Isle of Arran. And now, Smokehead. If you were looking for Smokehead Distillery on a map, you're not going to find it. Doesn't exist. Obviously, there's got to be a single distiller that it comes from. Yes, I know which one. No, I'm not going to tell you. But, Smokehead, what I will tell you is this. Smokehead is coming from Islay. So, again, as we go back to our map, Islay is right about there. It is the most populous island for distilleries in Scotland. It's known for its smoky, medicinal style of scotches. So one of those distilleries, I believe at last count there was about 14, is making this particular one. They're just not putting their name on it. And they're doing that because you're gonna pay more because their name is on it. It's also probably inherently a slightly younger distillate. For those of you who love that smoky, medicinal, peaty style of scotch, this is the one for you. Cool bottle, perfect for this time of year with the Smokehead. Oh yeah. Now we're getting some spice. Basically, almost like a campfire in a glass. So as you're sitting around your fire pits, as we're coming into October, or in October, you're not gonna be able to tell the difference. It's a nice pairing. A little bit of s'mores, a little bit of Smokehead. It's maybe not the most peated scotch. On a scale from 1 to 10, I would probably put this at maybe about 8. Because there's a little bit of sweetness. Even some baking spices that I'm getting from this. Let's see how it changes. Still getting that peat influence. Some of the sweetness has kind of receded a little bit, but definitely that spice is still prevalent. It's definitely, if you want to think about peat as coming from the earth, this has a lot of those earthy qualities. But tasty. So that's going to cover the basics of Scotch and Scotland. As we move forward, we'll probably look at some others from Scotland, a little higher end, a little lower end, different areas, and different ways to look at Scotch. It's all going to come down to what your palate tells you, what you like, and there's nothing right or wrong. Having a little bit of water, typically you're looking at drinking it with a bit of water, maybe 50-50, and if your Scotch can hold up to 50-50, 50% Scotch, 50% water, you know that you've got a quality product on your hands. But as we go forward, hopefully we'll be able to explore more, find something that you love. Thanks. I'm Jason Sagness. Thank you for joining me today.